we're launching Sky into new markets, we've had Google Analytics front and center of some of the decision-making processes.
One key part at the beginning was to look at users' review on the Play console so that we can be sure to have this connection with our players.
We use Google Ads to ask very specific questions, and this tells us where and how to spend money on advertising and find new players.
Enjoy new payment possibilities. Enjoy more per transaction. Enjoy expanding into new worlds. Enjoy it all across mobile, PC, and web. Enjoy the game. Welcome to Xsola, a global video game commerce company.
The session will be beginning shortly. Please silence all devices. Please take your seat. The session is about to begin. Welcome back to the stage, Chris Milicinos.
Hey everybody, welcome back. Everybody have enough to eat? Enough to drink? It was really good today. So we hope you enjoyed that lunch. And next to the stage, I would like to welcome Melissa Lee, the CEO of Massive Black Room 8, Miguel Doherty, executive producer at Puga Studios, Alethea O'Neill, the co-founder of Tether Games, and Patty Dingle, the global head of diversity and inclusion at Riot Games. And this panel will explore diversity themes and why DEI matters from a strategic standpoint. So, gang, come on up. And let's give them a round of applause.
Right.
Hi guys, thanks for coming. I'm super excited to talk about DEI, especially being an Asian female in the games industry. This is a subject that is near and dear to my heart. I'd like to start off first by introducing our panel, a little bit more on them. I have my notes because I did not practice my lines.
That's all right.
So Miguel Doherty has been working as an entrepreneur in games for 10 years. He is the executive producer over at Puga, and he's responsible for overseeing all producers and their projects. He's also part of the Puga Diversity Committee, which is a key part of creating and managing the DEI agenda for the 150-ish Puga teammates.
Yay, Miguel.
Then we have Alethea O'Neill, who has been in the industry for 20 plus years. And she's worked at big companies like Sony and Zynga and has also founded multiple startups like Gravity Bear and Tether. For the last 8 years, she has been co-founder and COO of Tether Studios, one of the leading developers in the fledgling skill-based gaming space. And at Tether, she is focused on building products and teams that define the new sector of the game industry.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hey.
And last but not least, Patty Nishimura Dingle, who has worked in the DEI space for 20 plus years. She currently serves as Riot Global Head of Diversity and Inclusion, overseeing D&I initiatives and efforts to support Riot's 3,000 plus employees across Riot's 20 offices worldwide.
Yeah. Hey, everybody.
Thanks for being here, guys.
Yeah.
I know, everyone has really busy schedules. First and foremost, I kind of want to talk about what is diversity, right? Like, what does that mean? We hear DEI. It's such like a hot word right now, right? You have DEI, I have DEI. What does it actually mean? And like, what is the difference between diversity, equity, and inclusion? Because I think a lot of times people kind of conflate and mix the three things up.
I'm happy to go. Yeah. Okay. Hi, folks. So, I like to think of it this way. Diversity is really like who's in the room, right? Counting all of your heads. Inclusion is really about making those heads count. Right? A little play on words there, but it really is inclusion. You're in the room, you feel valued. When you have those two things working together, you get equity, right? I think we all like to think that, we're all human, we're all the same, I treat everybody the same, but that simply just isn't true, right? People walk through the world very differently. Where they start in the world is very different. So when you activate those two things, hopefully you can get to an equitable place. And I'm sure we're going to talk about that a little bit more later, but that's kind of how we define it at Riot, and that's what drives the work that we're doing.
Nice. Anybody else?
I think the way Patty put it just makes a lot of sense. And that's super important, sort of differentiating diversity and inclusion as a whole, because some of McKinsey's studies also show that a lot of people can see a company being diverse but not inclusive, which is exactly what you pointed out is, well, yeah, they have the people, but they're not hearing actually everyone. So I think understanding that those key concepts make a lot of difference when you're aiming for your equity as a whole.
Yep. Oh.
So one of the things I'm most excited about, the three of you being up here, is just kind of the diverse backgrounds that you all have, right? Miguel being a service provider in Brazil, Alethea, a smaller developer in Nevada, and then Patty from behemoth publisher Riot. Where are you guys in terms of your diversity efforts? And what are you focusing on?
Okay, so I think one thing that sort of is a little bit different, like coming from Brazil, Latin America, etc. I think the entire way that, even the culture and the way that Brazil works is really a little bit different, because most of our of people there are considered non-white. We also have one of the greatest, or is the biggest gay parade there. We also had a female president. So I think in that way, you have, a lot of diversity already in the culture, and a lot of mixed people. So that puts Puga into a very interesting place in terms of what you're creating, because it sort of is already in the country. And I think the main efforts and the thing that we've been doing is one thing that you pointed out, which is a diversity committee at Puga, which is mostly focused in terms in what are the actions and actually maintaining the culture that we were able to create throughout these years of diversity and inclusion.
Yeah, I think for us at Tether, when we founded Tether, we approached it from a strategic mindset where, for us, building a small company, building a game, it was important for us to have a wide range of perspectives, because the fact of the matter is like the games, the products that we're building are for a wide range of users, and we feel that if we staff the creators of that content if we have a diverse set of developers, we're going to have a better chance of reaching a wider range of users. Because fact of the matter is the people who define themselves as gamers now are very different than they were 30 years ago. And if you want to target them, bringing in different perspectives during that creative process is going to help you increase your chances of success.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for us, it's simply global, right? We have a tremendous foundation at Riot. And Miguel, I know when we were prepping for this, even in Brazil and focusing on gender, but the intersectionality of like gender and ethnicity, we had a robust conversation about the Afro-Brazilian community. And for me, it's diversity within diversity, right? It's not a one-size-fits-all. So our job is to be flexible, whether we're working in Singapore or Shanghai, and also like kind of creating things that are scalable and sustainable horizontally across the organization. I think we can all, say that we're focused on talent, right? Bringing them in, the environment, the industry, et cetera. But then it's the nuances that are global that differentiate you. So we are very keen on that. And with our players in particular, like you were saying, Alethea, they're constantly changing, right? And so we want to keep up with that and keep our eye on it. I like to say, keep our finger on the pulse, because players are going to expect that too at some point.
Totally. Given kind of where you guys are at and the steps that you've taken, what have you seen that has been positive? Has there been positive outtakes from your efforts? I know we're all dying. Sorry, Patty. We have to ask the Riot question. But because it kind of goes hand in hand, right?
Yeah.
Riot had this incident or incidences, and you guys are taking those steps. And what are those steps, and what have you seen? What positive outcomes have come from that?
So I think what wasn't shared is I'm 7 months into Riot,
Yeah.
right? And listen, I chose to take this job because I really, truly feel like the authenticity is there, the intentionality is there. You probably heard about our new character, Kasanti, coming out, who's queer and black, which is that intersectionality. So to your point of where we've been and where we are now, I think that it is, no pun intended, it is night and day, right? It isn't black and white, like as we like to say. So I think this is what I want to share, that every company I've ever worked for, I've always had to lead with why D&I is important. I have yet to do that at Riot. People know it's important. They know it's critical for the business. They just want help around the how, right? And that's what I'm there for. I'm going to help with the how, because I have no doubt that folks will help me drive this work. Because, folks, it's not just about the D&I people. Everyone has to, like, you know, help with this. And I feel like everyone has my back, frankly.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting when we were talking, Betty, on the prep talk, that you mentioned that Riot they've gone past the why phase and now they're on the how phase.
Yeah.
And when we were talking internally, we were like trying to figure out, okay, so what is important for us to actually bring to the stock, et cetera. And then we noticed that we have been doing the how. Like the why already was there, and we've been doing the how, but we couldn't make sure, like from our experience, to say how to implement that, because we've always, that's a good point, I guess, that we've always had that from start. So everything that we've been doing is about maintaining the culture, like in the hiring processes, like educating people who are coming in and are not really understanding all the importance of it. So being able to see like where Riot was and now it's been evolving, and I understand that you mentioned like character-wise, but that's only one part. And from what you're talking, I've seen that there are things that are going under the hood that we haven't even started seeing, and that's awesome.
It's super interesting too. I mean, as an independent developer, and having worked at big companies and small companies, it's really easy to listen to the experts talking about DEI and the importance, and sort of taking a step back and be like, well, that's not relevant to me because I'm not a 300-person company. But like, I go back to the strategy and how, from the beginning, if you're trying to build products, if you're trying to reach a diverse and global audience, like bringing those different perspectives in early, it helps shape that. And if that's the mindset for every studio early on, you're going to increase your chances for success. And it isn't something that you need to wait until, like, okay, now that we're at this scale and we're experiencing backlash or anything. I think it's just, as a mindset, it's important to start early, and it should be across a wide range to prevent your company building something that's ultimately really niche.
Sorry, go ahead.
And I think that to your point, Alifia, indeed, like when starting early, like we can see some of the results searches. We have a lot of mouth-to-mouth, so sort of mouth-to-mouth marketing, where people like I've heard from Puga, like they are inclusive, like they are hearing people, they're actually worried about that. And a lot of our talent attraction came from that. And not only in that regard, but also the entire retention that we have. We've heard a lot of people that like, yeah, I like to stay here because this is a very safe environment for me. Might it be a woman, a trans person, and that's been super, super healthy for us in terms of culture and like maintaining those people. And a lot of them actually get more engaged because of that. Because they're like, well, yeah, this is making me so good, I want to give it back a little bit.
So out of that, I think karma points are always really great, right? But how do we translate that into profitability, right? Like, is there something that you see from doing DEI rather than, just being a good person?
Yeah, I have to say that it would, in my career, when people say, it's the right thing to do, well, hello, yeah, right? But I am very intentional about return on any investment and measuring outcomes, right? But there's different ways that you could do that, right? Our players are phenomenal and they're vocal. They will tell us, right, if they love something or if we can make some improvements, right? And so in our rioters, are also very vocal on this, and I love what you said about that safe space. That's a critical component of this, but as you know, for our games, the way that we make money, that's diversity, right, at its core. What do I want my, skin to be, right? In Valorant, all the different agents, because Valorant is depictive of the real world. And I want my agent to look like me, probably, right? And so that's where I think the profitability comes in, and we measure it based on sentiment, and we can also measure it by dollars, too.
It's funny, the karma points thing is such an interesting point, because that is the hardest thing for people to grok, where it's like, when you start a business, you're trying to build a successful business. Like, you don't win by having good,
being a good person,
high karma.
necessarily, right? I mean, as shitty as that sounds, sorry.
You should be a good human, period, right?
Yes.
And that's what, like, focusing on but it's like, okay, you need to hire the right people. You need to bring them in. And I think the best way to start there is by targeting people that are different than you, have different perspectives, because people tend to naturally want to surround themselves by people that are like themselves. And if you end up doing that, you're going to have a whole team of people that are thinking the same, and you're going to end up with a pretty narrow niche product, where if people say, I want to hire the right person, but making that difference in perspective part of that process, you're just increasing your chance of having a diverse team, a diverse business, and that's going to give you good business outcomes.
And it's not only about like, and Pat is totally right, like, it is the right thing, so that's a very important point. But even beyond that, like, even thinking about profitability, like she was mentioning, again, going back to McKinsey report, it does show that companies that do adopt DEI, like from 2014 to 2020, they actually have profited more than those that didn't. It was more focused on the gender, but as a whole, it clearly makes sense that there is profitability involved in doing that.
Right.
So how do you hire for that? Like, is there something specific that you talk to recruiters about? Like, what do you look for exactly? Where can you go?
So I love the word intentionality, right? Because let's face it, folks, Riot doesn't have a hard time attracting people. We don't. But when we're looking at diversity, either from a gender perspective, ethnicity, we partner with organizations that focus on those communities, right? And so when we partner with them, they're literally able to help us source those candidates, right? Hey, Worlds is coming up November 5th at Chase Center in San Francisco. No shame in our game. We also capitalize on the fact that our business is doing these big activations. And so it's an opportunity for us to bring in the talent that I just mentioned to show them who Riot is. Right, because no better way to show them than to bring them to something like Worlds. And then with those partnerships, we're able to then, engage those folks. But it's a big thing for me to bring in candidates that are also very viable for the roles and who are the best at their craft. Because we've all done job fairs, right? They're all free-for-alls a lot of the time. So with these partnerships, we know we'll get the talent we want, and then we'll bring them in, and then we'll show them what Riot is about, and hopefully they'll make the choice to come join us, right? So,
I mean, as an independent studio, it's like,
So everybody else who's not Riot.
We don't have the luxury we don't have the luxury or the resources to take a lot of those steps. I mean, I think if I were to give one bit of advice, it's like, from a mindset standpoint, like when you're looking at resumes, when you're interviewing people, latch on to differences. Don't fall into the trap of being like, oh, this person went to a school that I attended, or I'm familiar with the school, or we like the same things. Is approach differences as being a value add from the beginning, and think like, and it's not even just, it's not even the super visible stuff like gender or race. It's different economic backgrounds, even different games that people like to play. Because if you bring in those different perspectives as you're building product, as you're throwing ideas back and forth across the table, then it's gonna shape everything. And I mean, going back to like looking at a resume, if you think like, oh, this person went to a different school, embrace that. And then reach out, like target schools that may have like a more diverse student base to say like we'll target them for internships, but just start by embracing differences. I think it's just the best way for success.
Right. Yeah, that makes total sense, Olivia. And I think the key is always to try to strive for balance in terms of you need to embrace diversity and differences, but also to understand like, will this make sense for our team? Like when working together, like are they in some way in the same wavelength in general? And that's something that we try to go for when we're in our hiring processes. Given that, again, like we're in a culture that is already very established, so we're trying to understand like what are the right questions to, and how do we do that is by basically going through in the hiring process and telling them about the diverse leadership that we have. Like there's me, there's Julia, which is the head of 2D, who's a female, and then there's Lucas, which is a black man, as one of the key leadership of the company as well. And during the process, we actually make sure that, is this making sense to you? Like, and how do they react to that, right? Just to make sure that when they come in, it is making sense both for them and for us. And sometimes both the candidate would say like, well, this is different for me, it might not make sense for me, as well as on our end, that sort of happened, where the HR would come in, I'm not sure if that person would actually make sense because some of the core values that we have are not seen and perceived in that person.
Yeah. Do you mind if I just, because I want to recognize that not everybody has like the resources like we do.
Yeah.
And thank you for pointing that out, because I do want to share something that I think everyone can apply, and that's kind of the rigor behind the interviewing, like you were saying. We do have a process that I feel everyone can integrate. It's after we're all done interviewing a candidate, we all come in the room together and we have almost like a third-party person listening to feedback and then identifying when bias-loaded language comes up and checks the person and says, well, what do you mean by that? And I love what you said about differences. And so thinking about what do we really need from someone to do the job versus what do we want, right? I think that's important. So thank you for pointing that out, because I'm sitting in a place of a lot of resources too, right? And I think the intentionality is really critical regardless.
Totally. So given that, is there ever a point where like your search for DEI can be sort of like problematic? Like if you're like, does it come to where it's like you're too focused on this to where the product or the person is not the right fit?
I don't think we've had the challenge, for example, to see someone that's super technically good in something, like a super senior person, but didn't fit at all into the company. So we didn't have the opportunity to have this sort of challenge. But I'm sure that's at some point, like for more junior levels, or even some mid levels, where we were like, well, yeah, like this, it would be interesting to move on with this candidate, but this doesn't make sense for us as a whole.
It's a tough one, because I mean ultimately finding someone who's a good fit is the most important. I mean, it's the most important thing for business, for culture, especially in a smaller team, but even across bigger organizations. Like you need to have people who are a good fit and are going to move things forward. Yes, it's finding, I mean, again, it's honing in on something,
right,
where it's, what's the right way to say this? It's honing in on someone that has a good fit and contributing a new perspective and moving your business forward while still fitting into that agenda, like the diverse agenda. And so it's not a checklist mentality where it's like you need to be like, oh, they're fitting this box, box. It's more organic, and it's like, I think as long as you have the right mindset when you're approaching it, you're just increasing your chances for success.
Yeah. So for me, when I hear someone use the word fit, to me that goes, oh, bias-loaded language. That doesn't mean that their intention is to be biased, but that's where I use appreciative inquiry, and I come in and I go, tell me more about what you mean around fit, right? And then if they say they didn't go to the school that I like, then that's a different conversation, right? No one wants to work with folks that are not aligned with the culture we're trying to build. But at the same time, it's a contradiction, right? When we're saying difference.
Yes.
Right? And then, but you gotta fit in our culture. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there, but I think being open and having very clear dialogue around that and rigor behind that, I think is critical. But you always have to cast the net really wide when looking at candidates. But what do? We're rushing. We wanna hire very quickly because we gotta get this done. Pause and take some time, and then think about next time you hear someone say they're not the right fit, challenge them. Find out what it means. It may be something very valid, and it may be something very biased.
Yeah, I like that.
I think it's not necessarily like, and I totally agree with you, that is embracing difference and making sure that whoever is coming in is also embracing difference. Whatever that background is it like a different economical, racial, whatever, gender. If that person is as open as you are, and naturally, like you mentioned, you have deadlines that you have to go for. But I mean, that everything is making sense. I do think that embracing difference at the end of the day will make the whole difference.
So I want to talk a little bit about like producing a product in game design. How do you bring DEI into that?
Well, we're the big player here, right? So I'll just say that we do have a structure. I have a person on my team that actually works with product and partnerships, and we bring together a variety of writers to consult from various backgrounds. Listen, creating an agent, a character champion takes months, 9 months at minimum. So getting ahead of that is clear. But I think one of the drivers around doing this is, what does our world look like? Are we representing what's happening in the world? But the bigger thing is, like, is this gonna be relevant 10, 20 years from now, right? As our player base grows, that's really important for us. Because the last thing we want is for someone to go, oh, that's old and stodgy. We want people to see it 10 years from now, new players like you were mentioning, and go, oh yeah, I get that. That makes sense, I love it. So we have a lot of rigor behind that. It's very difficult when you're working with real world, Valorant, fantasy world, series like Arcane. How are you depicting these things in a way that's culturally authentic, relevant to people, but also fits in the story?
Yep.
Yeah.
So looking at our audience, I mean, our audience is predominantly female, and we have a whole range of demographics, different users, and for us, having a diverse team has ultimately translated into better connecting with our user and our customer, and which is why we've had the strategy from the beginning. But it's, and I'm going to keep hammering on this point, but it really is like, if you have a diverse mindset, a diverse strategy from the beginning, building your team, building your product, it's going to translate into better success with your player base, or at least have a better chance of targeting a diverse player base.
I can't speak specifically for game design because we're not art outsourced studio, but I think that at the same way that having, and that's something that just mentioned Alethea and Patty, which is regarding authenticity, right? When you have the diverse team, they are going to look, they are going to come from it. When they're coming in and giving solutions, they're going to think from their different backgrounds, and it's going to sound real, their solutions, because they've been through that, right? So like when you're creating a piece of art for global clients, we have to keep that in mind, and we need those teams to be also think and be inserted into that.
So we have a minute and a half left. I know that kind of flew by. I have so many more questions.
Look at all your cards.
I know. I wanted to open up the floor. Does anybody have anything that they want to ask? Anything? Oh, yes.
One right there.
Hello?
Hi.
What would you do to recommend to a company that wants to be more diverse, but somebody like myself isn't in the day-to-day interview process with some of the people, and you want to make sure that the people that you have in your team making those decisions aren't biased or making these decisions in a biased way?
I mean, if I can field that, when you have your team members looking at resumes or talking to people, again, it's humans tend to latch on to the things that are similar to themselves during that process. And if you look at them and just jump on differences or jump on the things that you might label as a mismatch for your company, for your culture early on, and have the people that are doing so, it's going to increase the chance that you bring someone in that offers a diverse or different perspective in general. So
I'm looking at that countdown clock.
I know, stop
Melissa,
looking.
sorry.
where's the countdown clock?
Right there.
Right there.
Oh, look, we're over time.
We're done.
Yeah, I could just say this. Like, I think that's pretty loaded. Like, there's a lot you could do technically, right? I've been in companies where we've scrubbed resumes, take names off, take addresses off, take schools off, just had skill set on there. I've had companies that change job description language. I worked for an organization when we took 24/7 out because it was a data center, the amount of women that applied went up 30% in a year. So it's really understanding those things that could prompt someone not to apply, but it's also something where what's creating the bias in people that are looking at that, you can consider that. But I think at the end of the day, a lot of companies are like interviewers. You just ask the same questions, because what happens in an interview? They're like, oh, your parents with, and then it becomes like this love fest, and that person gets, some preferential treatment possibly, right? So I'm happy to talk to you about that, but there's a lot of things you could do, and it might seem mechanical when you're dealing with like a human type of situation, but might be a great place to start.
I think from a company, again, that might not have as many resources, one thing that could be done, and I'm assuming that if you, if any leader has already that in mind, I'm pretty sure someone or a few people in your team also have those concerns in mind, even if not anyone. So what I could advise is try to put those people together, people who are focused and who are worried about that. Try to listen to them and how can they help during either through the hiring processes or even how to educate people in the best possible manner inside your company. So it's not only to start building the culture that will eventually lead just to maintenance, the culture maintenance, but also to start understanding what are the key differences from those people who are on the day-to-day work. Like, what do they feel like? What are they being listened? Like, those people that are worried, they will definitely be key on helping you during this process of, let's say, transition of actually implementing more DEI agendas in your company.
That's great.
Anything else? All right. Oh,
yeah, there's one.
One more.
Yep.
Okay.
Oh, I'm sorry, I might cut in too.
No, go ahead. We'll do it quickly.
Okay, sure. Yeah. So I'm a official content creator for this game title of like 63 million players.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's one of the biggest ones, I think. And recently they got a lot of backlash, especially on Twitter and TikTok, for the characters they release being like non-diverse, not very inclusive, especially like making skin tones like really light, for example. And a lot of people, especially in North America, they're really upset about this. And we've sent a lot of emails to them, but it doesn't seem like they really care or listen, because They're like the company is like Chinese, and their main player base, which are a lot of Chinese players, they don't seem to really voice the same concerns as the player base here. So yeah, I get a lot of attention from like a lot of viewers who have been asking me to like voice opinions since they know I have this connection to this company. Yeah, I'm not really sure like what could be done or what is the best approach to go about this, or if I can, I don't know, form a coalition with like other creators of my size to represent like people here. What advice would you have for that?
Oh, I think that's a really kind of deep question.
Come find us after, and because it's a long question, and we're running over.
Yeah,
let's talk after.
Being bullied by the
I know
monitor.
But
it's flashing at us.
I know. Thank you guys so much. Thank you guys.
Thanks, Melissa.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Walk off the
Let's get off this.
All right. So thank you to Melissa, Miguel, Althea, and Patty for the great conversation. So in our next session, our panelists will focus on how to have healthy conversations about NFTs online without getting people mad at you. Key, how to have healthy conversations about NFTs without getting people mad at you. So please welcome to the stage Brooks Brown, CEO of Consortium 9, James Wing, Business Development Principal at NC Partners, and Maddie Fairchild, Senior Director, Crypto Marketing and Developer Relations at Manticore Games. Hey, here they are. All right.
All right. Hi, y'all. Hi, everybody. My name's Maddie. I'm the Senior Director of Crypto Marketing and Developer Relations for Manticore Games. We make a platform called Core, which is a metaverse platform that can read any Ethereum NFT. So we recently had to bring this to our community of gamers, and it worked. So I'm excited to chat with y'all about how to talk about NFTs without everybody yelling at you all the time. So first, can y'all introduce yourselves?
Yeah, hi, I'm Brooks Brown. I'm CEO of Consortium 9. I've spent the last 15 years in and out of different types of development, from my time at Lucasfilm to when I worked for James Cameron on Avatar to most recently, I was at Starbreeze for a couple of years where I won a Tribeca and Sundance for a piece I made in VR. And super excited the last couple of years digging into what crypto can really deliver in gaming, sort of breaking a lot of the rules, getting into how it works, what it produces, and the experiences it can give us.
Yeah, and I'm James Wing. Have got my career started sort of in licensing by way of Lionsgate, moved on and was a venture capitalist for the most exciting time in crypto, which would be 2021, but did that for about 3 years. And then moved on to NC Partners, which is a new corporate think tank and investment advisory arm within NC Soft. Part of that is figuring out the blockchain question. So excited to get more into that today.
And so before we get into how, we have to talk about why. So Brooks, how about you start with why talk about NFTs at all?
Well, it's one of the things that I think is really fascinating is the underlying tech and how it functions within general experience for crypto enables us to do things we hadn't done before. It is ultimately a really boring technology if you boil it down. It's a database element that a person can control versus a centralized one. And generally speaking, it's also a more inefficient database element. That is like the least sexy version. How we dress it up, what we attach it to, and how we play with that tech can give us a lot of things we've seen even recently. Not my favorite experiences, but things like Axie, for example, Axie Infinity, which gave people inside of multiple countries that had pretty severe poverty jobs. That was amazing. But it also gave us the other side of that, where ultimately the people who sort of originally started the thing and owned Axies began renting it, and then suddenly they didn't have money and the whole thing did what it did. So I think there's a lot of potential and things to experiment with within the mechanics of how crypto functions, which is what our platform is about. And again, I do believe in a generalized ethos of decentralization and breaking down structures of power that exist even within creative industries.
Yeah, I mean, blockchain is a very real technology that I don't think we've necessarily scratched the surface of what it can offer to players in terms of value. It's very real and exciting, and it's going to be a long haul to get there. The why is questionable because blockchain is something coming to the games industry from the outside, and we can also everyone's talked this weekend or this week about virtual worlds being a reflection of real worlds, and I think that something like the database that Brooks described is pretty exciting in terms of what it offers for longer-term retention, but it's going to be quite a long road to get there. And so the why is everyone else is talking about it. It's going to be something.
Yeah. And so how do you navigate that road? Brooks, you talked about breaking down power structures. That sounds threatening. That sounds like people really mad at you.
Well, it is. It's one of the reasons that I think a great deal of the plays so far within crypto have basically not been about sort of utilizing it as it is, but instead finding ways to hyper-monetize an audience that sort of is within a very small group and monetizing them as heavily as possible. I mean, the joke of it is I'm on stage here talking about crypto and NFTs. Dean, who invited me to come talk, the first time he ever heard me talk about it, I was the person asking why sarcastically and sardonically and giving a ton of people shit. That was 2 years ago, maybe three. That change and that shift in me has been about understanding the technology underneath it, breaking it down and moving. And as we start talking about where we can move with it, the power we can give players and how we can set it up, the important part is also understanding how those things line up in the machine we're building. Because crypto is not a thing that builds a whole machine. Crypto is a piece of a larger machine we're all building called games, called economies, called metagames, called experience. And this one piece can adjust little bits if we do it right. If we do it wrong, ultimately what it does is it basically hardens that core experience, mines it, and shits it out the bottom.
Yeah, Brooks and I are in the same boat there. Where NCSoft is at in this process right now is figuring out what's exactly possible, just like we've done with every other technology like AI, like free-to-play, like many other things, and then figuring out how does this return value to the player. If you take a fun thing and then just make it about money, it's not going to be a better experience for the player necessarily. I mean, there's some games that talk about that, and that might be a separate conversation. But right now, we're at the stage of blockchain, of figuring out, okay, how is this going to work exactly, and how is it going to change and improve the emotional reaction that a player has with the content?
Yeah. Can you dig into that emotional reaction? Because, of course, that's what we're trying to get to. Games are about emotion. It's about play. Brooks, you talk about play a lot. And so how can you activate a positive emotional reaction without that turning to the dark side?
I don't even know if it's necessarily about a positive emotional reaction. It's about general emotional reactions. One of the things that made me interested, my first moment of sort of aha, our platform as a thing you can think of as kind of a ultra permadeath system where we take tournaments around games, we monetize them, and then inside of those tournaments, players who compete, we literally kill them in the digital space. The beauty of NFTs is their permanence. But it's only sort of permanent. It's permanent the same way kind of life is. If you watched, and I watched as a lot of people lost a ton of NFTs, and you can go on Twitch and see how they went about it. A lot of NFTs on OpenSea started getting DMCA'd. And I watched people distraught, not angry or pissed off, distraught and sad that their NFTs were gone. This loss, this feeling I have of having something. I don't even know if I'd call it a positive emotion, but it's an attachment. The ability for us to utilize that type of attachment with digital objects is incredibly powerful. It can be used for good or bad. We can use it to manipulate people to giving us more money for shit things, or we can use that to drive more powerful experiences that are meaningful and deep. And so that's, I tend to sort of be the middle ground, I guess. It's more about the general emotion and experience than any singular, oh, I'm happy.
James, are you for or against emotion?
I think we're talking about somewhat different things, though. NCSoft is, 6,000 person organization with, a very large baked-in player base and existing IPs and games and things like that, and immediately changing that just so that something can be interoperable or we use a different currency. I mean, that is a solution. Payments are hard. Blockchain could be a solution. We don't know yet. But whether it's negative or positive, that changes the type of game that you're talking about. Is it a battle royale at that point, or are you more or less wagering on FIFA matches or something like that? But in order to keep the ball moving forward, it's really important to keep having those conversations around what exactly the technology is capable of at any time.
Yeah, and I'm hearing a lot about benefits, like talking about end user benefits, just like our ancestors used to do. That was something that we found in talking to our existing community. was in if you talk to people one-on-one or like one-on-three, and if you're talking to them about, hey, this is what it gets you, and talking about things like ownership, about trading, about having these different abilities that are unlocked, then you're able to have a normal conversation about it. But if you're mostly talking about the underlying tech, then it can start to go really astray.
Well, even if you're talking about ownership, one of the difficult things is talking about, again, how it's part of the machine. The idea of digital ownership, everyone loves, but it's kind of a solution for a problem people weren't super pissed about. As someone who's got like a few $1,000s worth of Dota items, I've never been like, boy, I wish I had a bigger market than Steam. The way we're playing with ownership and going with it instead puts us in a position where we go, well, person owns it, you can sell for that thing. Now, what machine are we making that a part of? If I can play a game and get an NFT that I can sell, then that makes me money. Great. But it also means that I could also hire 10 indigent poor people globally to do that exact same game for me. And at that point, I'm now having 10 people make me that same money, but also flooding the market, making it worth less, making me pay them less, meaning I need to hire more until ultimately that explodes. We see this happen. This is normal industrial shit happening. This is not like some weird stuff. This is how business works globally. And so if we don't realize how we're building it, where we're incentivizing, and how we're building the ownership structure, we're ultimately going to end up in the same place that coconuts are in.
Yeah, this is sort of where the rubber hits the road, I think, for my thoughts, which would be, it's wait, sorry, what was the question again? It was the original one.
What are some things that you learn in like talking directly to people about this? And actually, you have an interesting angle. You have to avoid a lot more than the rest of us, where NCSoft is a Korean company. NFTs are illegal in Korea. So like, how do you think about how to navigate what to talk about?
Yes. Explicit illegality is not necessarily the case. It's more of a window law, which is where, someone will come knock on your window and tell you, hey, you can't do that, but you've already done it, and it becomes a whole thing. In terms of discussing it with an existing player base, if you came for this answer today, I apologize, but the answer is you don't really talk about it. It's very vitriolic and incendiary and tough, and we kind of earned that moniker in 2021, given the amount of predatory things and scams and frauds. It was a really tough year for a lot of people and a lot of startups. But that doesn't mean that this tool, like call it a shovel or whatever, is bad because you can hit someone with it. You can still use a shovel to build something amazing. What that is and what that exactly offers at this point in time, I don't exactly know. But it's something that we can help move forward as the interactive industry. So.
Yeah, without a doubt. When you start talking to gamers especially, and we've run into this because our platform is, it's unique in the space, and we're trying to figure out how to have that conversation with core gamers especially. Ultimately, it comes down to a show, don't tell, and people have talked about that. But the biggest reason it does that is because gamers have not a sixth sense for it, but they've burned enough times by things that, hey, don't worry, just buy some horse armor in Oblivion. It's just a microtransaction. It'll work out in the end, don't worry. And everyone who plays games knows that's kind of a huge load of bullshit. And it's ended up being this thing that has become hyper-predatory and, again, sort of cemented into a generalized business model. Instead, if we can start having conversations around how we're building, where it actually really benefits the ecosystem, how we set things up and show how it works, rather than just saying, yes, you have ownership, yes, promise you there's these good things, they're going to smell bullshit a mile away. Because, again, we've said it a million times to them over other stuff that has become very, very negative.
Can you give us some examples? Like, what are some ways what are some things that you have shown that you didn't have to tell
well, our games are entirely free with zero purchase pathways. So it's an easy conversation to have with gamers where we say you don't have to touch anything, you don't get anything, you literally have free games, we don't care about credit cards, you can't even buy anything. These types of conversations where they go, wait, how? Then we can have a conversation about where incentive structures exist in our economy, how they work and how they operate. And they're less vitriolic because I'm not trying to take money from them. Instead, I'm selling them on, hey, we're making just good games from great developers who want to make fun shit. Instead of, hey, by the way, Galaga Legends, a great example. If you go to Apple Arcade, go download the Galaga game. Built originally completely for free-to-play models. They monetized the shit out of it. But for Apple Arcade, they had to pull all of that out and let you play. The fun part is the game is horrifying. It's one of the worst games you can, because it's literally built to be shitty and have you pay money to skip parts. Is that what we want to do? Gamers know that's where this is heading, and they want to avoid it. And so, again, by showing, by having the conversations like you with artists and creators and saying, here's how we're enabling, here's how we're building, and having the larger conversation, that's the only way to do this.
Yeah, and we found something too where, so one of the things that we did was we had a list of our 100 top creators, and we talked to every single one of them, like in small groups, because you really get what people are, what they're really feeling when you're in a small group and not just talking to them on Twitter. And really consistently, they were interested, they were excited. Actually, nobody was upset with us in that middle group. And several of them used the phrase exactly, oh yeah, I'm crypto closeted. And I'm just really interested, I've been reading it in a bunch, but I'm not gonna talk about it publicly because I might get yelled at. But then when we went public, after we had listened to them, but also talked about here's what we wanna do, here's how it benefits creators, here's why it's important and why we think this can offer something to you. Then when we did the public announcement, those 100 creators were advocating for it. Like they were the ones that were going out and were actually expressing that message so that we didn't have to do all of that.
You can't go about it where you say you're going to have true ownership and talk about lofty ideas and you have to go, here is how this is going to work, here's how we're setting up, here's how it's being built, and being as open as possible about the entire thing.
Yeah, and then James, I do want to circle back to something that you said where like talking about something without talking about it. And so what are the things that you move the focus towards to generate more conversation and to talk to people about the kinds of things that you're building?
Well, those conversations are still super early. From a content side of things, we already have a lot of the systems in place that crypto purportedly offers to new studios. Really, player trading, really robust economies, if anyone's played Lineage, and things like that. So moving the conversation has not been necessary for us yet. Understandably, it's something we haven't approached, given reactions to other studios in the market. But this kind of comes down to a little bit what Brooks alluded to earlier, is that a lot of what is currently out there being introduced as new is not new to people who actually build the games, whether that's interoperability or ability to buy and sell and trade items with other players. Counter-Strike is probably one of the best games of all time, but Valorant doesn't have those features and seems to be doing okay as well. So for us, when we communicate it, and I talked a little bit earlier about our fantastic player base, it has to be something that they want and are asking for, and right now they are not, because true unique value and novel concepts haven't been introduced to the ecosystem yet.
And so that actually bridges us to what are things that need to change about like blockchain and Web3 in general for us to be able to talk about that more directly?
Well, I think we've got to stop using terms that not only have earned negative sort of responses from general, but like the term metaverse. It's my favorite thing because it's literally 40 years of my life where every time a metaverse has existed inside of any science fiction or writing, it's a bad thing. Like there is no like, oh, hey, we made a metaverse, how awesome. It's always the Matrix or Snow Crash. It's negative. There's a reason for that. It's because it's intentionally either an escape from the world or it's part of a sort of negative space. And the use of it has been so overblown that people everywhere are starting to make fun of using it. But this goes with that, goes with tokenomics, as an example, even NFTs. These terms are utterly to themselves meaningless. They're code words we use for each other as sort of a semiotic chain that allows us to discuss basic things, but they have earned negativity because of how they've been executed. There are multiple Save the Children NFTs that exist out there that were flat pump and dump Ponzi schemes. Do you want to be part of that? Because that's the famous stuff. That's the stuff that was in the New York Times. That's the stuff that's on the front page of YouTube. Understanding instead, pulling back, fuck tokenomics, how about economics? Like just the thing, because that's all it is. Let's have the conversation about the things instead of words around them.
I feel that way about companies that call themselves Skynet.
Yeah.
Like oh, that was the villain.
Yeah.
That's not the, anyways. What are some other things there of, so you mentioned tokenomics, but rather economics, that it's not about metaverse, it's actually about
experience. It's about experience. People want worlds. They want to know what they're going to be doing. They want to know what the space is. These lofty ideas and concepts, we have general things we sort of talk about, but what are they? Well, it's the ability for us to go anywhere and have fully transferable IDs. Do we really want that? Happy to have a discussion with anyone. No one actually wants that. They want the idea of that. But how do we deliver that? How do we set up? I go to Assassin's Creed. First Assassin's Creed, they made this really complicated climbing system because everyone wanted a really cool climbing system. Do you know what it is now? You press A and forward and you run, because what people want is not a complicated climbing system. They want to have the experience of feeling like they're in a complicated climbing system. That's proper design versus just tossing in something. Proper design gives us a chance to sort of sit back and go, what do people want? How can we build that? And how do these technologies working together enable us that?
I was going to go back a question to sort of what needs to come out of the ecosystem in order for it to be a little bit more fair, I suppose. I think the notion of speculation is something that doesn't necessarily belong in certainly all games. It's not really necessary in almost every case. And to date has sort of just led to a lot of bad actors. Like I mentioned, fraud earlier, things like that. But not everything has to be around in-game player trading. Not everything needs an additional infrastructure layer in order to make it a good game or to get into certain guilds or what have you. It just, at the end of the day, you can go to our website and it says, connecting the world through joy. Does that require NFTs at this point? No, it really doesn't. The furthest along metaverse, in my opinion, not speaking for NCSoft in this case, is probably Fortnite, because it's the most fun, it's got the most IP, it's the most accessible, and if you added NFTs to it tomorrow, there'd be a few excited people, but not all the players.
Yeah, well, it's the fun part about NCSoft, it's why I love talking to you about this stuff, is the first time I really understood what a metagame was. Because Lineage, if you ever play Lineage, by the way, I wouldn't necessarily recommend the game, but it was wonderful. Like, it's the first time you start to understand that there's two types of gameplay. There's the game and the metagame. What are people doing? How are you working? How are you fitting inside of things? It's the game about the game. And having that economic stuff, having the trades as literally the most important thing, works for some people. Doesn't work for every part of every game, and understanding how these things affect each other. Again, the MMO people, I think, have a lot of really good lockdown advice and experience we can look to understand that.
And something I really noticed in your materials, and actually in what both of y'all are saying, is understanding who you're talking to. Yeah. That each, like in your case, it's you have the players and you have the metagamers. They want different things that look very similarly. So, and in some ways, that's a way to even bring speculation back in, because buying things and having the value goes up feels good, but if what you're buying is an in-game power-up, then that can start to feel really bad really quickly, and sometimes folks misidentify who they're talking to.
Yeah, it's a crypto degens are ready to have any conversation around crypto you want to have in a million different ways. Gamers, different world, and it's necessary to understand the separation between them, and also that they aren't playing the same game, even though it's literally the same game. They're not playing the same game.
Yeah, one of my favorite things about working with NCSoft on this is that from day one, the day I got there, and joined part of this blockchain experiment, the number one word and the most consistent word has been community, and making sure that that works with our existing player bases. Hopefully, it brings new players in, obviously, but making sure that it services our actual community is of paramount importance to us, always.
Yeah, there's nothing more important than the end user. When I was at LucasArts, Jim Ward, who had left right as I joined, love him or hate him, his number one thing, and a lot of people have opinions on Jim Ward from Lucas, he always said the same thing: all that matters is the fan at the end. And George said that. When I worked for Jim, it's the same thing. People who make great content know that that thing at the end is all that matters. All the rest of this is us, talking about whatever garbage. It's the person and their experience at the very end of that matters.
Yeah, and I think one more thing to add to that, too, is I believe it was Catherine yesterday who was talking about Gen Z and all the different micro-communities within a player base. And being able to please all of them is borderline impossible. And so be ready for that. The idea that there will be some backlash. Not everyone wants, X thing or Y thing. But if you make it a fun experience for the people who do care and care a lot, only yield positive benefits.
That's true. Yeah, I'm reminded of earlier about leaning into emotion or avoiding emotion. And fundamentally, if you try to make a message that everybody likes, then it's not going to get very far. But if you have something that some people love, even if some people respond strongly, you've got something. You can build on that. And so we're coming up on time. Any parting thoughts on, say, things to definitely do, or things that things that people in the audience should avoid as they start talking about this thing we call the metaverse?
Model out what you're doing. Model it out as far as the entire system goes. There's no such thing as a single piece being added to a game. Everything affects the entire experience. Don't sell yourself short if your idea you feel is too small. Don't presume it's going to be the only thing that matters either. Everything needs to be modeled out all the way through, and if you aren't doing it fully, you'll know, because it sucks to do it fully. If it's an easy task, you're doing it wrong. But model it all the way out, and then start seeing how shit really affects the player. That's it.
I think mine is a little more abstract, so I apologize, but it's whatever you're doing, do it with passion. I think people don't really talk about that right now, is that a lot of VCs have come in and been like, oh, we'll turn the X, Y, and Z into a crypto game. But sometimes those teams don't want to make it a crypto game. In a lot of cases, they don't. And that's not going to really yield a positive experience for anybody. Is if you turn something into, a weird amalgamation of Frankenstein of like digital feudalism or whatever it ends up being, and it becomes about the game. But again, just please be passionate about it. I've met founders who are building companies who kind of go along the lines of what I said to don't do, but the game looks really good because they did it with passion. The economy would be central to it, and that's what the game is about. And I'll play it, sure.
I kind of want to change my answer now. That was a good answer. Better than mine. Mine was like this really direct, boring bullshit thing.
I mean, you still can if you want to.
Yeah, no, it's both of them. It's a combination. It's care about what you're doing and make sure the team does too. I mean, that's a great point.
Yeah, and we're all really excited about the tech, but it's ultimately about the players and arming your community, your creators, your developers with knowing that as well. All right, then I think we have a little bit of time for one or two questions. I don't quite know how the questions work.
$300.
$3,000. I'm sorry? We'll just say my bracket didn't do well, so it doesn't matter. My bracket didn't do well. It's okay. I'm an old school Navi fan. I have a bunch of old Dindy stuff. This year has not been a good TI for me.
All right. Any other questions?
Yes, sir. Oh, there we go again.
Hi. You mentioned Lucasfilm. I was wondering, were there things about game development that you imagined earlier on in your career that you now think of as in, wow, I had those first principles or those things which I thought were going to happen. I really saw that correctly. And are there things where you're like, wow, I totally missed out on that one for you?
Yeah, I mean, and to bring it kind of actually to this conversation, one of the things I went in first is this idealistic design first, games first, play first, and I still generally believe that, but the thing I was missing is the cynicism of the business side is not undeserved. Video games are financialized the way they are, and they have to exist creatively inside of a space that allows for financialization. That structure needs to be understood. It needs to be brought in. When we talk about NFTs, we're talking about how we financialize games. When we're talking about selling a $60 product with multiple microtransactions, we're doing the same thing. These are not going to be the same games in the end, no matter where you think you're starting. And so having an understanding of the design process alongside the business, having the business side inform that, be part of it, not control it, nor the control the other way, and make sure everyone's sort of set in. I think that's, not that Lucas did that, they were fucking terrible at it. But the lesson there, as you kind of move through, is a really great sort of way to think through generally everything. It's an understanding of both.
All right, friends. And we're at time.
Sorry, Dean. Dean, I'm sorry I swore. I promised Dean I wouldn't swear. I did 3 times. I'm sorry, Dean.
Sorry. Have people been getting mad at you?
I've had people get really pissed with me, actually, personally. We've been trying to recruit. Game developers will not work for you unless you, it's a tough one. It's tough to hire people in because they see it, they won't want to talk to you. People I've been close to for a very long time who are wonderful and who I get along with and love me, they won't touch it because it's crypto, it'll destroy their careers, or I'm a scumbag for touching into it, which has happened. On the other side, crypto people are not happy with what I'm doing because I'm kind of changing the rules of what that's set up. They want to have conversations around, well, how much can I put in and get out in 3 months? And I'm like, that's not what we're doing. I'm building a sustainable platform. And then they get pissed when I say that that's their main goal, because it is. So you have people who are going to be angry. And like you said, it's consistently understanding who you're talking to, be ready for the fire, but be ready to just have honest conversations about what you're doing. It has worked in the long run, but yeah, I've pissed people off. You've literally listened to some of them. Talk to me, Dean.
Yeah, likewise. I think the people who've gotten mad at me have more so been from the crypto community. I think there's a lot of cop-outs in when you're talking about crypto in terms of how you can justify it, whether that's saying, look at free-to-play, or it's all about returning value to the user. But both of those things are predicated on very flawed ways of thinking. Free-to-play removed the biggest barrier to entry for gaming, and then returning value to a player, that's just a developer choice. Anyone can do that today. Finding new and novel concepts is kind of a really exciting challenge for all of the games industry, and we're gonna get there. And when we eventually find something that's really, really cool, I think it'll do fantastic.
All right, we should leave it at that.
Yep.
So thank you all so much.
All right, thank you, Brooks, James, and Maddie. So it's time for a short 15-minute break. Then we'll see you back here on the Ridge stage with a session on navigating the esports winter. So we'll see you after a short break. Thanks, everybody.
The session will be beginning shortly. Please silence all devices. Please take your seat. The session is about to begin.
Welcome back to the stage, Chris Milicinos.
All right, welcome back, everyone. Welcome back. Careful of that ripple in the carpet. We're continuing our afternoon sessions now with the panel focusing on the next chapter of esports. So what will it look like? How will esports companies be weathering the esports winter? So please welcome to the stage Eric Anderson, the head of esports at FaZe Clan, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Senior Vice President of Strategy at Vindex, Arnold Herr, CEO of Gen Z, and moderator Jordan Fragan of GamesBeat. Come on in, gang.
Sweet.
Hi, everyone.
everyone. Thanks for coming today. We're really excited to talk about the esports winter with all of you here today. I'm just going to ask everyone to quickly introduce themselves so we can get some context.
Eric Anderson, I head up esports for FaZe Clan.
Ryan Fitzpatrick, Senior Vice President Strategy for Vindex.
Arnold Herr, I'm the CEO of Genji Esports.
Awesome. So we're here to talk about esports winter. Obviously, there's a lot going on in the industry right now. There's a lot of buzz about, things going sideways. How confident are all of you that we're actually going to see like a major market correction?
Market correction? It depends on what it's relative to. So obviously there was a big spike up during the pandemic in terms of online viewership, and that kind of softened a little bit now that everybody's back to going to plays, going to movies, going out and about. So I think there's a little bit of decline in that. But besides that, I think there's still some games that are steadily improving. There's some that are dropping, sentiment, moods changing. So I think I'm hopeful that there's not a really hard correction, but there might be a little bit one depending on the game.
I'd say we're in the middle of one right now. We've been seeing publishers kind of tightening back on their spends. I think everybody saw the memos that came out maybe about a year ago at this point. And anybody who's taking VC money has been asked to get a little bit more specific about how they're utilizing their funds, focus on smart growth as opposed to growth at all costs. So it's no surprise to me that we're seeing this, but I think we've seen this before, and I'm pretty optimistic that we're going to come out the other side of it all stronger and bigger and better for it.
So my view is, they call me, I think in our office, they call me Dr. Doom, because I think we're in the middle of esports winter, and I think it's about to get a lot colder. The reason I think that is, obviously, as you mentioned, the venture capital money drying up, but also basically on the publisher side, they've basically realized that the traditional esports model, which was primarily driven off of media deals, but primarily driven off of sponsorships, both have completely tanked, right? Especially for publishers. And to stand up a different type of company, a different type of industry, this painful transition is happening right as we speak. So in those kind of transition scenarios, I think, for the longest time it was people viewed esports as beachfront property. Everybody jump in and grab what you can. But now it's, okay, well, clearly some property is worth less than the others, right? And so are you making those right decisions and navigating this thing? And then, ultimately the growth of esports is true. It's still there. It's still growing really quickly. So if you can make it out and survive, you can actually thrive because there's actually going to be much less competition. So that's kind of my view, is that it's going to get much worse. But if you're able to survive it, then you're going to have much less competition and a better business model to boot.
Gotcha. So a little bit of variety in our opinions on stage, which is nice. So on that note, depending on how confident you are in things cooling off and things changing, how has that affected your strategy going forward for your companies?
Do you want me to nail it?
Maybe we can start with Arnold.
Well, I think we've definitely noticed trends happening across different esports titles that we participate in. The first thing that happens is obviously player salaries come down, right? We saw it in Overwatch League, for instance, which came in with a lot of hype. Unfortunately, it never got the viewership or the media deals that it wanted. And pretty soon, player salaries started correcting, right? The second domino to fall that we think is going to happen is actually that a lot of esports teams with kind of poor business models are not going to make it. So once that happens, that kind of has a cascading effect where, continuously, orgs get smaller, player salaries come down, especially in the titles that just didn't work as an esport. Now, this isn't true for other games that we participate in. For instance, let's say Rocket League, which has actually, I've noticed that it's booming, it's growing, player salaries are going up, but it's not as crazy as it used to be, where we saw it happening in early League of Legends days or early Overwatch days where player salaries just spiked way too hard. We're not seeing that happen anymore. So I think people are just getting smarter about the space. And even in Overwatch, once they had that correction, now all the orgs and the league is much smarter about how they navigate this thing. So I think the hype era is over, and people are trying to build real businesses at the right size instead of trying to build it as big as possible.
I love that. So at Vindex, we're a technology and infrastructure platform for the gaming, esports, and creator industries. And when you start talking about orgs trying to get smarter, that speaks very much to the core of what we're trying to provide. Our focus, where we're really doubling down, is on data and helping our partners, whether it be publishers, orgs, teams, leagues, and even a lot of the non-endemic brands that are coming into the space with the money to spend to kind of help people weather this winter. We're helping them be smarter about where they spend their money, when they spend their money, and how to actually capture the value of what their organizations are providing. That's, I think, one of the interesting things about where we find ourselves now is there's so much engagement being driven by these esports orgs that is probably not being properly captured or monetized. I think the publishers see a lot of the value because it's driving engagement back into their games, but the orgs are still struggling, many of the orgs are still struggling for ways to capture that value.
Nice. So along those lines, I mean, we're talking about teams spending money in a smarter way, so teams are cutting the fat. How are you evaluating which parts of your business to keep, which parts to decide that, we're going to sunset this? Maybe Ryan. Yeah.
Well, I think we're a much different type of company, so it's a little bit difficult. We are very much a growing company focused on technology. What we're trying to do is help the orgs and publishers out there figure out where they should be putting their money and where they should be putting their time and resources. So I think maybe...
So where you would maybe, I don't know if you've given some guidance to teams recently or anything like that you can share, but are there areas where you are advising people to maybe make different choices?
Yeah, I think it's one good example might be in how they engage with brands. And how they are packaging themselves and their opportunities up against maybe their competitors. There's a lot of opportunity to demonstrate and prove yet again that, like, when we say gaming and when we say esports, what most brands really mean is, can you deliver a 12 to 24-year-old audience to me? And we need to do, as an esports industry, need to do a better job of saying, yes, we can. Here's how, and here's the return on investment for you. So those are like some of the ways that we're directly working with brands right now.
Interesting. Maybe Eric, you can hop in on this one, and I don't know if, obviously FaZe right now is so in such has just been on a hot streak with announcing partnerships, but are there areas of FaZe's business where, some of the focus has shifted to other areas, or are there parts where you are not investing in quite as much?
Yeah, look, we're already a pretty diversified org, and so that allows us to kind of hedge ourselves pretty effectively. I mean, I can speak specifically to esports as well, but like, we've got creators who, we're partnered with the NFL and do 1v1 things, and that's like part of what FaZe Clan does, right? And so we're gaming, and then we're still looking beyond gaming, and then we're trying to figure out how we can reestablish what we do in a new kind of lens. So we're probably in fact expanding more aggressively than anybody else right now. So I have to be careful because there's stuff that's announced and not announced. But I'd say...
it's just us.
Right. Someone's going to yell at me later. So what I'd say is on the esports side, for example, I think there's interest in a lot of the initiatives that are happening around women's esports that are very interesting to us. And then there's, we just announced a new title today, about 2 hours ago, Apex Legends, right? So there are game ecosystems that are expanding. Arnold just got into Rocket League and kicked my team's ass about 4 days ago. So, there's opportunities that are in here, and so we're looking at that. I think if I have to shutter some teams at some point, we will, because on our side, we have the flexibility. We're not stuck in certain franchise structures. Maybe that's not the right word, but we don't have the same, we never had the same thesis that a lot of other orgs did. And so we have kind of one exposure to a structure that is a big league ecosystem where we have to sell a spot, or we have to just kind of go down with the ship if it doesn't do well. Everything else I can, if I want to get out of the game, I can get out of the game, right, in 2 seconds. And so on the esports side of things, we can pivot really quickly. We're not a big tanker, we're actually like a little speedboat, which is odd because we're one of the biggest orgs in the space. So I'd say for us, really, we're looking for all the opportunity, we're looking for expansion more than anything else. And I'm not looking, which is why when I'm sitting here, I'm the most optimistic probably, because we're looking for what those opportunities are. So.
I think one thing that I've noticed, and it speaks to Phase's, how they navigated this, is that basically the era, in my opinion, the era of a pure play esports organization that only does esports is over. I don't think that is and you'll see this as a pattern. A lot of the top esports organizations that are smart about how they navigate are diversifying their business, right? So one of the things that we've done is we've actually launched probably the world's largest gaming school out in Asia. So just the same way you would send your kids to soccer camp, over 10,000 parents have sent their kids to a gaming school to learn how to play League of Legends or Overwatch or PUBG or other stuff better. So for us, as we think about titles that we move into and out of, there's two main factors that we look at. So one is how good of a fit is this with our other business lines? So other folks they're launching their own game. I think 100 Thieves announced they're launching a game. People are creating merch lines or selling keyboards and that kind of stuff. But for us, it's how much of a good fit is this with our school? The other part for us is we believe that the future of esports can't rely on big media deals, right? This is not the NBA, NFL, MLB. It's just not. So it has to rely on in-game revenue and creating opportunities for teams to participate in an ecosystem that's driven by skins and in-game revenue. The first thing that we saw that was in this vein was actually in Valorant, where they have the partner program, which is completely driven off of in-game skins. It's not based off of YouTube or Twitch paying a lot of money, which probably they won't, for these big media deals, right? So I think that's the future. And I think all of the big publishers that want a credible esport are going to have to move to create a system that allows them to create in-game revenue opportunities for teams to really build a community around and monetize.
So we've touched on a few different ways that teams are diversifying their revenue. There's obviously Gen G's school, and we've seen other orgs, developing video games. Are there areas where maybe from a different org than your own that you've seen where it's been a really interesting business that esports orgs have diversified into?
I love 100 Thieves. I think everybody there is a genius, and I think what they do is incredible. I also think launching and building a game is really hard, especially in this audience here. So I would say I think it's really great to see entrepreneurs take risk, even in the face of doubt. I don't think that's a business that I could handle. I don't think I have that creativity and kind of the engineering chops to be able to pull that off. But I actually hope it succeeds, because I would be the first one to clap for them and say they're geniuses for pulling this off. But I thought that was probably the biggest move that I saw of something just completely different, right? And I would assume that the thesis would be around the fact that they have kind of a marketing launch engine, which is one of the most difficult parts of launching a game. But I thought that was one of the most interesting ones, and I think there's going to be a lot more happening around this space with more esports orgs kind of diversifying their business in different ways, right? Like, if you look at me versus Eric, I can't be as cool as FaZe ever in my life. So, I can never be in the cool cloud scene. But, I just think it's a really interesting thing where you're going to see every esports org figure out what their tangential and core other competency is besides just going out there and winning games.
Yeah, and to piggyback on that, I'll use 100 Thieves as an example as well, but use their energy drink launch, Juvie. They've built a great team. Yeah. They've got a great product.
Tastes good too.
It tastes great. But to your point, they're using their marketing might as an organization to launch these new products. They've been able to bring some people in to help formulate a great tasting functional beverage, but in reality what they've got is this massive marketing organization that they can then push it through. And interestingly enough, they have some folks that I had worked with previously at Red Bull, and the old joke with Red Bull is it was a marketing agency that happened to have a product. I think we're starting to see more of these orgs working in similar ways as they spin up new product verticals.
No, 100%. Yeah, we've built our own motion graphics team inside that's then been getting, Psyonix and other people have come to try to get work done, like big publishers, actually try to steal our guys. But I'd say TSM with some of their apps, like Blitz and stuff, is pretty interesting. The previous generation, if anybody's a Fnatic or NIP fan, the peripherals businesses that they spun up, no idea how they're doing, but they spun them up. And I'm trying to think of some others that are like that. There's some of the international orgs have built like agencies and things like in Southeast Asia and Brazil that are very successful.
Team Liquid has a pretty solid consulting practice helping brands enter into the space.
Yeah, or if you've ever used Liquipedia, they literally have the Wikipedia backbone of esports. I literally check all of my game info on Liquipedia, and that's still a business that they own. So yeah, there's a lot of different things. And again, the bigger orgs have kind of figured that out, or overall, and that's why they continue to scale.
Absolutely. I think it's fascinating to see all the different ways that orgs are experimenting and figuring out what works for their business. We touched a little bit on the international market. Obviously, esports, North America is very different than Asia, which is very different from Europe, which is very different from the Middle East. Are there, all of you guys are based mostly in North America. Are there do you think that the esports winter is going to affect each sort of region the same? Are there going to be regions that are better suited to handling it?
I mean, I'll give one example of a publisher that was, so the biggest game in Brazil for the last 3 or 4 years is a game called Free Fire by a publisher called Garena. And effectively overnight, the ecosystem's kind of collapsed. We'll see, it's not fully dead, but like, it's no longer the biggest, and now there's stuff that's starting to fight for it. Partially because they invested in a platform that didn't make any sense, and they put all their money through there, and so they'd have no money to keep on growing the ecosystem. And so I think different markets, but again, on the flip side of that, and this is also why I'm generally optimistic, it creates opportunity for other games like COD Mobile or Mobile Legends Bang Bang or other different products that are out there. And so you're going to see weird contractions, but as long as there's somebody that still thinks that market's worth something, they're going to be investing into it. Tencent is making a big push right now with PUBG Mobile, which, if you've ever played it, it's already one of the biggest games in the world, and they're making an even bigger push, right? And they're leaning heavy in the Middle East and Southeast Asia right now. So I think Middle East is probably where you're going to see a lot more investment. For anybody that's not familiar, there was a big acquisition earlier this year to the tune of about $1.5 billion. And then a few other things, too, that I'm not sure got a lot of press overall, but including investments into publishers. But there's going to continue to be a lot more investment in those regions overall. So a lot of growth opportunity.
I think potentially for the investors here, I think there's a really interesting thing happening where the press attention, especially in North America, I've never seen it so decoupled from the actual player base and where the dollars are flowing, because a lot of it's actually coming not from North America. Yeah. So you mentioned a lot of these mobile games. You jump on Twitter here in North America and they're like, oh, this game is terrible, this game is bad, this game is just free to play, and they're just charging users too much. Meanwhile, in Asia, they are loving this free-to-play game, and the vast majority don't spend that much money. I was just at a private dinner event for this one game called Lineage, which probably only the Koreans in this room would know about. And there's one person that took it. This game did incredibly well just out of Korea, and there was a room full of whales in the game of 100 people, and they were launching a special soju line for the Lineage game for these people. And each single person there had spent over $400,000 per year in that game, right? So you think about like where the dollars and the users and what's happening in these markets compared to what the North American media covers. I've never seen this disconnect be as pronounced and as big. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there, a lot of growth that we're seeing on the ground, even in Korea and kind of our APAC presence. And seeing those really happen. So I'm still very excited, and that's where I also get very excited about that digital revenue model, which I actually think even though the press and the investors and is out here, a lot of the action seems to be happening internationally now, and at much larger scale than we've ever seen.
Maybe Ryan, you can touch on this. Are there areas where, Vindex obviously has a huge amount of data. Are there particular areas where you're seeing lots of growth? I don't know if it's a particular league or a particular game.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you mentioned Apex. Apex is one of those titles that we're seeing a lot of growth, and a lot of the data that we're looking at is growth on like viewership and engagement across video platforms and social media. And that's, I think those are the sort of things that we need to be looking at to note the trends. It's not just purely the kind of old school viewership metrics of like a big esports event. You've got to take all of these other components of a scene, of a community, and kind of add them all together so you can see the full impact. Apex is certainly one of the ones that we're seeing a lot of growth. Valorant is another one. You know, at our Belong Gaming arenas, which we've got in the UK and in the US, we're seeing the actual physical in-arena gameplay spiking very heavily around those two titles. So, and it maps fairly well with what we see across Twitch and YouTube on the viewership and engagement of that sort of content. So, you know, I think we generally operate under the assumption that, you know, if you have a title that is doing really well across video and social platforms, you'll typically have it doing pretty well within the game client, but it doesn't necessarily mean the other way around. The titles that are doing fairly well in like in-game performance that aren't investing in building out their larger content ecosystem are the ones that are probably on the risk of starting to drop off pretty quickly.
Makes sense.
I think just to kind of add on his point, I think I'm seeing the other trend that's really interesting is as publishers give up on media rights being the kind of primary driver for esports, it's actually going to lead to kind of that second level and second layer, which is, well, publishers are going to act to try to create their own platforms because yes, it can be on YouTube, it can be on Twitch, but they don't need to preference one or the other.
Yeah.
And they're going to start creating their own platforms to kind of do, you know, showcase the game, showcase the sport. One example is Rocket League. One of the big reasons why I got really excited was they had the game within Fortnite. You could actually watch the match within Fortnite. It got more viewers from that than it did the actual broadcast on YouTube and Twitch. And that got me really excited. I mean, I think money, I'm the business guy, not the creative guy, was right now you go on Twitch, on YouTube, if you see a skin in the game that you want to buy, you actually can't do it from that view. Instead, they're going to show you an ad on Tide, you know, pods that help. I just bought these Tide pods, so I'm very excited about them. But they're awesome. As Tide is here, you know, call me later and we can get a sponsorship. But you gotta advertise them for Tide pods, which the gamer most likely probably doesn't do their own laundry, you know, that much anyway. So that disconnect all of a sudden breaks because people give up on media rights. They start saying, let's put it on every media platform, but create a preferential platform where we can reward the viewer for actually watching this, and you can directly purchase something and have much more attributable ROI and really monetize that engagement that exists. So I think that's kind of the future. That's what I'm excited by. How quickly it'll get there, who knows? But it's really interesting because, like they always say, history rhymes. And I know publishers tried that before and it failed because they tried to go head to head. But I think now that the player base is big enough, there's an opportunity for these things to arise and be created.
Well, actually, let me, to one thing to add to that with specifically Psyonix and Epic. So Epic acquired Psyonix, I don't know, at some point in the last couple of years, which is the developer that makes Rocket League. And, you know, everybody's running around talking about metaverse, this and that, but like, this is truly, you're literally going in and watching another video game while you're playing a video game that then features advertisements, which they're finally allowing to kind of put onto these cars permanently. So like, we're figuring out all the licensing deals and structures around that. Which again are super simple, but the publishers have been very against allowing it to happen. Rightfully so, they have very, very impressive legal teams that do not want that. But now they're starting to open it up. And so you're now starting to create all of these feedback loops around this where it's now, you're going into Fortnite, you're just hanging out in Fortnite, and you're doing all the things that you want to do while you're there, the same way that Zuck is trying to talk about us all kicking it there and trying to meet in the metaverse and do all this stuff. Kids are already doing it. Like, they've been doing it for a while, and like, you can't just cop the word, it just is what it is. So that's pretty cool, and we're starting to see more and more publishers trying that. Hence, like even Riot's kind of pivoted some of their perspective on before trying to just hold on to the rights and not allow anybody to do it. Now allowing everybody to watch party because they're seeing it work in other games. And so again, I know there's a lot of winter stuff, but there's a lot of people that are trying to experiment. When you experiment, some really cool stuff can come out of it. And that's what I'm super stoked about with that. But also actually really fast, one thing you said too, from an international perspective, so you're seeing a lot of love in Apex and Valorant. So the Japanese market has been pretty much just closed to everybody when it comes to gaming. They just do their own thing. And like Korea is more open because of League of Legends and a few other games. But Japan is now, like, for whatever reason, really into Apex Legends and Valorant. And so all of a sudden, what has now been a barrier in the gaming space to enter in and market and do anything else, with the exception of a little bit of Rainbow Six and Call of Duty, is now wide open. And they want to do large-scale events, and now Western world connecting with Japan. It's actually a really cool thing. And it's something that I know you look at, and we definitely look at with regards to how to penetrate certain markets with an authentic way to get into that game. But if you can do it where it's authentic to your core audience and then bridge those together, that's the best of all the worlds. And we want to do way more over there. And again, this is all literally in the last year. So it's awesome.
Absolutely. So as we're winding down, are there particular esports companies that you think will have, or types of esports companies that you think will have the hardest time adapting in this new market environment?
Adapting.
I mean, we've kind of touched on it already, but it's the ones who are seeing themselves purely as competitive esports organizations and not a way to deliver a highly sought after, highly valuable audience to brands. Like that's going to be I think the main revenue that's going to come through the industry in the next few years, and the organizations that are best suited to capitalize that are going to be the ones who move forward.
Awesome. So just to wrap things up, and maybe we'll have time for a question, is there any advice that you guys would give to either startups or smaller esports orgs as they are trying to handle things going forward?
I mean, again, I've generally been very positive about this whole stuff, but if there is a true winner or any of that kind of stuff, it just means there's way more opportunity. It means that certain people are shutting their stuff down or not looking out for the new business models that are out there, and they're not experimenting. And I think that's the greatest opportunity for any startup or anybody that wants to get in, because everybody's looking for now, okay, how do we monetize? How do we scale stuff? How do we do things differently? I mean, that there's a lot of solutions that you can try to figure out. So I would just say keep on doing what you're doing then. That's just me though.
I think I'd agree with that, and I would kind of add to it, focus on understanding your audience and what they want and what they need, and focus on delivering that. There's going to be a ton of opportunities to chase everything, and people get desperate in trying times. I'm leaning a little bit more this way now. I'm feeling less. I'm feeling less doom and gloom. But I think the true way forward is just to listen to the audience. No other industry has such a vocal, engaged, and just social audience than the esports industry. Use that to your advantage and listen.
So my view is that I think it's really important as a startup that you figure out not the business model that was before, but really focus in on what do you think the business model will be. So for us, it's not chasing after the same jersey patch sponsor for peripherals that 10 other esports teams are, and during trying times, they're going to bring down their margins, they're going to bring down the cost. That's not the race we want to play, right? It's really understanding, both of your point, what are the areas we want to focus in, and we want to build this business going forward in the next 5 years, rather than what was the business the previous 5 years. Because if you chase the business the previous 5 years, it's just going to be lower and lower margins and too crowded because people are going to get desperate. Versus creating new things, they're actually going to have less ammo to do that because they're too worried about cutting and not really focusing on what needs to be built.
Awesome. I think we have time for maybe one question. Sure. Yeah. Oh. Emergency mic.
Cool. So my question is more around, Ryan, you mentioned something about the different stadiums or different event spaces being packed for a couple of key titles, right? Something like an EVO is highlighting a bunch of different titles, whereas international is obviously putting a certain kind of game up on a pedestal. Do you think that more events should include more games as a part of that to kind of hedge against maybe a lack of interest or a waning interest in a particular game and maybe more putting a genre on a pedestal? Or do you think that companies or developers, publishers, whatever it might be, should double down and try to really make their gamer experience the highlight of the event?
That's a tough one. I think the FGC, the fighting game community, is just its own thing that you have to kind of understand probably operates a little bit differently, and EVO is an institution there. The cool thing about EVO is we did a bunch of analytics on that particular show, and it showed that there were 2 or 3 top titles in EVO that drove the bulk of the viewership and engagement within the EVO broadcast, but also that viewership and engagement carried on independently on those titles and all of the other content that's created across Twitch and YouTube for a month after EVO. So, that being said, EVO's probably got a lot of value that they bring to the table that isn't being recognized because it's driving viewership and engagement on these other titles for weeks and weeks to come. As for combining things, it's interesting. Like, there's always going to be room for these mega events with multiple titles, but if publishers are owning these things, it's going to be limited to the titles that those publishers own.
Let me gas Ryan for a second. So if the Microsoft acquisition goes through with Activision, you're going to see under the hood of Microsoft Halo and Call of Duty. And if you go back far enough in Ryan's career, he used to deal with events that were Halo and Call of Duty. And funny enough, those games go together hand in hand. Those communities are basically massively crossover. If we watched this past weekend, one of the most legendary COD pros, who was a Halo pro that left and came back, just won World Championships. So he's got both rings. And so you're just going to need to find that thread line. Like, for anybody that's been to BlizzCon, same concept, right? You've got a bunch of different communities. They're crossovers. They love a Blizzard, or at that time at least, and wanting to show up even though they're playing Diablo or StarCraft or Warcraft, right? And so I think you can make that work, and I hope that happens. And the reason I say I'm gassing him is because Esports Engine is a phenomenal tournament producer, and will get basically all of that stuff and make a mega event because they've done it before, and I think it'll go over pretty well if they do it. And that's Esports Engine is under Vindex, is a subsidiary of Vindex. So like, I hope you guys do that because I love your events.
So do I.
And then, over in Europe too, I think those things kind of used to happen with ESL, which is technically a competitor of yours. And they used to host StarCraft and League of Legends and Counter-Strike all together. They've also found that you can have crown jewel moments with a bunch of stuff wrapped around it. So IM Katowice is a perfect example where it really celebrates the Polish gaming community. And there's a whole bunch of games that are there that you probably never heard of outside of Poland. But you have the crown jewel, which is a Counter-Strike event, right? People go to that, and then you make it kind of work, and it's like a mini festival. Both of them work fine. I think you just got to program it the right way and do it. And for the love of God, nobody program more music festival gaming things because they suck. Or if you can figure it out, you make a lot of money because they all suck so far. So.
Awesome. I think that's going to be time. So thank you guys for joining us, and thank you guys for coming to the conference.
All right. Thank you, Eric, Ryan, Arnold, and Jordan for that great conversation. So for our final session today, our panelists will look into the future and share their thoughts about trends on the horizon that could become the next big wave for games. So please welcome to the stage Shan, that is partner at Lightspeed Ventures, Ryan Lay, the partner at Makers Fund, Ryan Yu, partner at Galaxy Interactive, and Eric Goldberg, co-founder of Playable Worlds. Oh, everybody's out. And let's, for our final panel.
Well, thank you all for coming to the venture investing panel and for going to the legendary Dead Dog panel, the last one of the day. We figured that just to make sure you showed up, we'd have a lot of money represented on stage and 3 sparkling personalities and me. In any event, I'm Eric Goldberg. I've had the privilege of being an advisor to VentureBeat for 10 years, and for many years I was an advisor or board member to companies that raised money, including about 70 rounds. Exits that included Playdom, Pixelberry, PlaySpan, and Story Toys. Currently, I'm co-founder of Playable Worlds, which has raised 3 rounds, 1 pre-pandemic, 2 in the pandemic. Next to me is Ryan Yu, who is, in addition to partner of Galaxy Interactive, he is co-head of gaming. Galaxy is fairly well known in this field as a game and crypto fund. It has been one of the most active in games. It has 800 million of assets under management. Some of its notable investments are Necom, the Indian studio that did blowout numbers with its recent debut, Build the Rocket Boy, and they also are an investor in Playable Worlds. So if I do not ask If I do not ask tough enough questions of Brian, the other panelists have agreed to beat him up. Anyway, next to him is Ryan Lai, a partner of Makers Fund, which is also one of the earliest, who also got into being a dedicated games fund before it was fashionable. They have 1 billion assets under management. Some of their best known investments are GenVid, and Ryan has participated in Metal, and most recently Odyssey, which was announced within the last 2 weeks. Next is Shan, a partner at Lightspeed Ventures, which is one of the great Sand Hill Road firms. It raised a fund of $7 billion, and they promised to leave at least $200 million for non-game investments. She has, after being a growth partner, she has helped build the game practice, which includes Triple Dot, Hidden Leaf, and most recently, her recent announcement was Methodical. She also serves as the Lightspeed board representative to a small little company called Epic,
Very small.
which was an early investment. Okay, in the last year, we have had the game venture field has changed quite dramatically. There were 4 500 million or greater funds raised that are games specific, raised since March of 2021. We have an enormous amount of dry powder. We have just seen a quarter in which over 50% of the dollars invested went to one sector, which is Web3. And we have also seen, obviously, for those of you who read periodicals other than VentureBeat, that the world economy seems to have gone in a wrong direction. So we're going to talk about what changes this makes. For the first thing, I would like the panelists to say, let's assume that both Web3 and Metaverse, the hot category of last year, completely flame out. Which categories will return your funds that are not any of those three? And I will let Ryan Y. We have a user interface problem over here. Ryan Y. Take the first bat on 2 or 3 categories that you will be investing, that you are interested in investing in the next year.
Thanks, Eric. Can you guys hear me? Cool. So I would say that's a great question, and the first category is actually not going to be return our fund, but it's something we always want to do, is the indie game developers. It's a surprise to many of you people, but that's where the innovation, creativity comes from, and we want to continue to support the indie game, communities, and in the end, we're game investors. We invest in best content, right? So indie game is something. Indie game developers who want to build a venture-backed business is something we truly like. And the second category I'll just quickly is could potentially return our fund is mental health related games, and that's something there's a $500 billion market, and we deeply believe video game as an interactive form are the best way to not only diagnose and also potentially treat mental health. I think that's something just some topic I'm really interested these days.
Okay, thank you. Ryan L., can you give us the categories that you're going to do that aren't Web3 or Metaverse?
Yeah, so I think Web3, it's a clearer delineation. Web3, non-Web3, but Metaverse is kind of hard, depending on how you define it.
We'll get to definition later.
Yes, I don't think we have to address it too, but I think across the value chains we'll still be committed to deploy content, less anchored necessarily on the pedigree of the creators themselves, where they're from, but more on the ideas, more on the execution, and then B2C consumer platforms. There's still a lot of opportunities. I know UGC is a very trite thesis at this point, but I think there are still very interesting developments within that space If you look at open source programs becoming a trend, right? Like with creators and modders really appreciating the transparency and the ability to collaboratively build this platform that they're creating upon. And then you can look at also the way the business model is evolving, right? Increasingly it becomes more and more creator friendly. Still a lot of experimentation in that space, but you could see some new approach where creators really get to own most, if not all, of the revenue from their content, and with the platform really just monetizing for the services that they provide. One more that I want to mention, I want to be very cautious here, is AI-assisted development, content development. I say that with a lot of caution because I know that's a very trendy theme to talk about. The emphasis is on assisted, not replace, right? There are a lot of limitation, human input and curation, very much needed. And people talk about it making development easier. I actually think it's the contrary, where the bar is higher. There are very few creators and developers that actually have the technical know-how and the design prowess to really pull off AI-assisted development. But I think there's a lot of exciting potential there in terms of the gameplay that it can potentially enable, and also in terms of the type of studios that can now attempt the different ambition in terms of content design.
I'm tempted to ask whether your AI investment is going to replace all the indie studios that Ryan wants to invest in. But we'll go to Sean. I'll try and provoke fights later. Sean, your categories?
Yeah, happy to dive into it. So I think instead of category, we think of it as like two key themes or beliefs or thesis. The first one is the concept that everyone can game. So if you look at today, the gaming industry generates about like 197, almost 200 billions of revenues in a one-year basis, and there are 3.2 billion people around the world playing games. The definition of a gamer has evolved quite a bit over the last decade, both in terms of age, gender, geographic presence, is the broader demographic. So we really believe in the concept that everyone can game, and then this means that we will be investing across genres, categories, and contents, and also platforms. So that's kind of one thematic belief. And the second one is that we think increasingly we're seeing gaming as the center and of social network and content creations. So what does that mean is that when US consumers spend 8 hours a day on digital social content, gaming actually make up 2 to 3 hours of that. And some of the best games in the world, like Roblox, each individual user spent 2 to 3 hours on these. So with the time, screen time engagement, we're starting to develop our personal social network around games. So we think any toolings, infrastructure, services, and even mechanism that will support how gaming become the center hub and of social nodes is kind of where we're looking into at the next 3, 5, or next decade to come.
Thank you, Sean. Staying with you, as mentioned in the opening remarks, Web3 has attracted over 50% of Western game venture investment. There are currently very modest numbers. There are under 100,000 people who have actually spent money on a crypto-based game. What metrics are needed to make these high-performing venture investments? That is, the number of purchasers, and the volume and/or frequency of purchases. Can you give us an idea of how long you're expecting for Web3 to develop into a market that gives a venture-worthy return?
Yeah, so I think fundamentally, this is almost a little bit of a controversial topic at the moment, but I personally, and we believe that games should be games first. Games should be fun, should be content and a place where people want to spend time naturally, and also just where this is where the aggregation of attention, time, and fun is kind of concentrating towards. And how we think of blockchain and Web3 is ultimately this is a mechanism to renovate monetizations, in-game mechanisms, and player interactions. And what does that really mean? So if you think about almost 10, 20 years ago, we didn't really have the concept of free-to-play. When I was probably in my high school or junior high, I used to buy this thing called 点卡, which is like games time card. So I would buy this and go to the internet cafe, and I would play games for 2 hours, and when the time is done, I get booted out of the system. And then the concept of buying a skin, actually doing in-game transaction, monetization, IAA, IAP,
didn't really come out till very late. So the last decade, gaming ecosystems transformed a lot, innovated a lot, and with blockchain, we think of it as almost decentralized data ledger for payment rails. So how does blockchain get integrated into wallets, in-game marketplace transaction? Can I trade my skin? Can I hire up the rarities of my heroes? Can I do other things of in-game economies? So those are all like inspiration questions that we're now able to think of because of technology.
But Sean, how long are you, again, we started with free-to-play. There were many hundreds of millions of people playing the games, so there was a much larger audience. We understand that we have to get the speculators out. In other words, we have to make games and so on. It's an extraordinary point. But how much time, how much leash will you be giving Web3? Can you give me a range, 3 years, 5 years? How long does the field have to develop?
This is what I would say. I think it will happen very slowly, and it will happen all at once.
Oh,
and how long does
classic.
it take to happen slowly? 3, 5, I don't know. But when you hit the certain threshold point, it could also happen as well. It's almost very similar. Why I quoted the past history of free-to-play games. This is kind of how we think about it too.
Okay. Are either the Ryans willing to give a quote that Dean can hold against them in terms of how long it'll take? You're welcome to pass if you don't want to do it.
No, I think this is something we think a lot at Galaxy, right? Interactive, and to us, Web3 game, is a digital co-op, right? That means it's a community that the economic incentive is a way to glue the community together, right? Not the reason why people come together, and that sounds very easy, but it's actually very difficult, right? So first, you need to have a community, and a lot of pitches we see these days, they say, oh, I want to build a Web3 MMO, and this is gonna work because once you have a community and all this trading, everything is gonna work. But the question I can ask them is, do you know how difficult to build MMO, scalable MMO? So again, I know you want to ask the years, but I think to us, we do think there's a few different, I don't have time today, maybe you have, but maybe we don't have time today to go through the detail, but we do think there's a few potential game mechanics could work with Web3 and surface this type of model. But and there's going to be a wave of company already doing that. A lot of them in Asia because that's what they're good at. And we think they're going to hit the market within a year and a half.
Right, that's why I made the distinction for West. So I'll just offer that it took Facebook 4 years from inception to knock off MySpace and become the dominant player. So at least I'll give a number for Dean to put in his article. Next, I'll go to Ryan Lai. So VCs, including at least one of you, talk about restraining the deployment of capital because of the economy going down. Conversely, Backman of Play Ventures and Varik of Bitcraft spoke of VC's obligation to invest, even during a crypto winter, referencing the traditional 3 to 4 years that a fund makes new investments. Where's all that money going, and are you deploying capital at roughly the same rate as last year?
Yeah. So I'll answer the easier question first. From Maker's perspective, we actually have seen very stable rate of the number of top-tier teams coming out, emerging in this space. And so we actually have been very stable in terms of our investment pace. Since the start, 2016, last year when it was very full of excitement in the market, and more recently in Q3, Q4, it's still a relatively stable pace. To answer the broader market question, I'd share 2 observations, and then I'll discuss where I think the money is going. Observation 1 is I do think we are entering a correction. I know there are different numbers, there are different ways to cut the data. You look at deal count, you could see maybe an increase, maybe a decrease depending on the filter. But if you look at transaction volume, the amount raised, amount invested, and Q3, you should see a decline, both in quarter, but also year-on-year basis, right? If you look at PitchBook, and this is some quick sort of analysis I did just last night, just using a simple filter of games only, venture deals, you get the transaction value of about 2.2 billion in Q3 this year, which is just over half of what you saw, 4.2 billion in Q2 and 4 billion Q3 last year.
For clarification, they were stripping out the pure crypto.
Yes, I stripped out the Web3. Sorry, I should have clarified that. And so that's a stark difference. And two additional notes here. Note one is these numbers are based on deals announced, right? Announcement of the deal. So they're lagging indicator. A lot of the Q3 transactions, and some of which Makers is part of, are really investments that are made and negotiated and done in the quarters leading into it. So before the market shift happened. And then second note is that what's missing from these numbers is really the heightened difficulty with which these fundraising are being done. On the ground, and this is my personal experience, and I would love to hear my panelists whether or not it's the same. We see longer processes, right? We see tougher negotiations and just overall, I think, fewer investors that are really in play these days. Observation two is I think the correction isn't as sharp as what we see in public markets, right? I expect the change to happen more gradual, but also more prolonged in the venture space. And I know many companies that are still spending the capital that they raised during the upmarket, and they have another 6 to 12 months to go, and maybe even longer, depending on their burn management, before they really need to go out and raise a round of fresh capital. Investor, like you mentioned, the amount of dry powder in this space, it's not news. Just look at the large cohort vintage of funds that raised and announced in the past 12 to 18 months. So on an encouraging note, I do think that some level of appetite for early stage venture game investment will retain, at least among the dedicated investors. So these are the observations. In terms of where I think the money will go, the first and the most obvious one, we also talked about that, is flight to safety, right? Teams with the best track record, with the most proven business model, with the obvious traction, those will get, there will be concentration of capital around those teams. Now that is a well-known phenomenon, so I'm not going to belabor the point. The secondary implication of that is I think with less noise and with a more reasonable valuation overall, I do think there are exciting opportunities in the more unconventional, less talked about verticals and sectors in games. And those are obviously harder to find. Those requires conviction, requires some level of risk tolerance. So not a lot of investors can really do that. And of those who try, very few, I suspect, will have the pattern recognition to make it work.
Thanks for that, Ryan. It's been pointed out that, especially in the age of social media, that a lot of the things that are developed as the next Valorant or the next League of Legends may have an initial good performance, but then people tend to go back to the next game. So we're definitely seeing on world charts that you have to have something that people say, I can't get this anywhere. I can't get this anywhere else.
Yeah.
Anyway, and the other point that you make, which is a great one, is that for last year, the single most popular flavor of studio was someone out of Riot, a team out of Riot, a team out of Blizzard, and maybe a team out of Epic. And now in Web3, the answer is a team out of Riot, a team out of Blizzard, and a team out of Epic. So for those people here who have not worked for any of these companies, is the recommendation you're making is that they show that they can do something different? What other signs of proof do you want to see? And anyone can take this one.
Yeah, I'll take this one first. I actually care very little which companies they came from. When we look at, and this is our framework, every investor will have their own framework. I personally care a lot about three groups of qualities, right? The first one is conviction and insight, right? Like, I think that is a prerequisite to be a creator in this space. You need to have insight that's differentiated from any source, right? It can be from your experience, can be from your previous job, can be from the community that you're involved in. You need to have some different insight, and you need to have the conviction to do so and follow through despite, you know, others' challenges, right? There's reason why people don't believe in that, and you're the one that's doing it. And that usually, and the really impressive creators with both of those usually also add another quality on top, which is humility. And that's the hard part. I think where it becomes really rare is, you know, it's a very fine line between conviction and being stubborn, right? It takes a lot of, I think, experience and open-mindedness to really understand that, hey, you know, this is the idea I'm going after. This is what I'm going to dedicate my you know, how many years building. At the same time, I'm willing to listen to feedback from players, feedback from other creators, from maybe even investors, and incorporate in a way that doesn't compromise the vision. So I think that's really fine. So that's bucket one. I'll quickly do bucket 2 and 3, and I'm not going to take too much of the time.
So anyway, Ryan, I want to go to the other Ryan, but you've basically done the venture equivalent of there's a fine line between madness and genius. You've applied to the field. Ryan, why you are actually willing to look in categories for which working for those companies will not work. So can you talk about the things that you're doing that are afield from, a category that you're doing that's afield from studios?
You mean a non-studio type of things?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, okay, actually I want to talk a little bit about studio as well, but I think we're out of time.
We're going to run short.
Then I would say the non-studio, like, the reason we do content, right? If you think about metaverse, I don't want to define metaverse, but if you think about the virtual world we are going to live, right, we're going to migrate to in the next generation, I think the reason we do content is because that's the reason why people, you know, enter the metaverse, right? You have a reason, and otherwise it cannot just be a social space people just hang out, and that doesn't work. We all, you know, there's history to prove that already. So content is the reason why people do that. But then the other side is how to get to metaverse, right? How to do that. And that's why we start investing in the technology infrastructure, and not just the today's infrastructure, talk about tomorrow's infrastructure, right? So we recently hired a gentleman called Jeff Brown, who is, you know, used to be a VP at NVIDIA, managed the GPU virtualization billion-dollar business, and he and Michael Fan, my partner, and myself, looking at the deep tech space. How do you drive that? You know, what can actually make a headset that potentially get into the virtual world space? And that's something that's important also for a content developer to know, because think about that. That headset, whether you can get to mainstream within the 3-year, 5-year, 10-year, that changed the way you're thinking about how you get game design. So that's something I would say. I do want to quickly show off this thing here, because this.
You can't. Okay.
I will just show off
very
one
short.
second. Very short. This is the computational we invested. This is small chip. You know, so it's the first, maybe the world's first, you know, analog computing SoC can do 5 TOPS per watts. And this type of thing is going to change how people think about virtual world. And that's why we are getting the space. And we're basically both, like, you know, invest heavily in the content and the infrastructure space. And our door is open. So if you know, just like Ryan and Shenzhen as well, and we are steadily deploying capital in this space.
Yes, and we have not seen this. We have not seen VCs supporting the tech that supports games on a wide-scale basis. So I hope that other firms join with you. Briefly, Ryan L. pointed out that when you look at the dollars invested in the third quarter, that it basically was the reason it so compares to last year is because the crypto funds did so many game investments, of especially around 40 to 70 million. Sean, you definitely have invested in crypto and are in the head of it. Are the crypto tourists, are the ones who are going into who've gone into games going to get out soon? And if so, why?
Yeah, so I think both in the space that we spend a lot of time, crypto, blockchain, and gaming equivalent, there has been almost like a hype, I would say, obviously in the positive way, that a lot of attention, spotlights, and money being flown to both of these sectors over the past couple of years. But it is like both Ryan was indicating too, it takes a lot of foundation building and systematic thinking to be getting into the roots of both of this category. That's why Lightspeed has been building the groundwork, and we're here to stay. I think it's important in this kind of seasons and cycle to look for the funds who are not only here for the tourist moment, but also for the long-term development of the cycles and the ecosystem. So we have invested across different subsectors and value sets of both gaming and crypto, and I think that's kind of where we'll continue to do so in the near future.
My quick add to that is, if you talk to your any investor on the crypto Web3 game, if the first question they ask you is about token economy, then just don't. I think you don't need to continue the conversation. Yeah. I think you have to ask the question about why you need Web3 in your game.
Yeah.
And I think some crypto funds getting it right now.
No, I actually think so. I think some of the crypto funds, and they are getting a better understanding of like what makes a game fun. And I think that's the trillion-dollar question nobody has the true answer to. But if you're not even asking that question, that's kind of where you're coming from. That's, flip side of the coin. That's where when you're looking into a gaming studio, how you're embedding and why are you using this technology, but ultimately, what is the player progression, what is the game mechanism, how are you engage players and users? That's the question both crypto gaming and traditional gaming investors should be asking, and there's no difference in that aspect.
And you also have to ask, why does crypto allow you to do something that they can't do in the game without crypto? In other words, why does that contribute to the enjoyment? Now, this is one of the real issues for game entrepreneurs out here. One, when are the speculators going to, not that the speculators are going to go away, but when are they going to stop distorting the market? Speculators, we have the stock market, so obviously that's out there. And also the crypto funds, when they hit the winter, decided to invest in games as a safe category. And it will, either they have to get game knowledge, or we're going to see a lot of, as for the reasons you described, we'll see a lot of crash and burn.
Yeah, I do think there is, this is not saying we are fully trying to speak on the behalf of our Web3 friends, but there is a reason why gaming has become such a big focus in both traditional and Web3 senses, because the nature of our industry is fascinating. It fits, I think, remember Matthew Ballman had mentioned this in the podcast. There are three characteristics of gaming, which is very rare, that gaming has all three. First is that it's large. It covers a broad range of audience, players, and people, basically, people and time. And second, that is constantly evolving. It's constantly pushing forward, innovating. And third, that is technically intense. So gaming has the potential to become a segue into leveraging a lot of usage and consumers and usage scenarios into the blockchain rails. That's how we think about it. So this is not complete in defense, but this could be the rationale of why gaming has become a big focus. And obviously there are other cases like consumer social, commerce, and all the others, but those are still in their early innings, and there may be more crypto funds and more crypto money into that in the next decade as well.
Thanks. So we were told we could run over by just a couple of minutes, so I'm going to ask one last question. Then after we take off our mic, we will be out, the three panelists and I will be outside to the left, so to answer your questions, because we actually have 6 questions that we will not get to. The last one is a short one, which is the mobile category has seen one of the greatest drops in investment. Essentially nobody wants to invest in UA. We have seen console games be a wonderful business, very large, but not venture investable. Mobile right now is near venture, is very, very difficult to get venture investment to almost vanishingly small. Is mobile going to stop being, while it's going to be a huge multi-billion-dollar business, will it become venture investable again?
Yeah. I can take that first.
Please.
I truly believe mobile is I think the big market mobile is still ahead of us. I think the point is a lot of people think about mobile last couple of years because of the I would say the surplus you have on the user acquisition front, and not any game, but a lot of type of different game after optimization can make very good LTV over the user acquisition, right? And that market is not there anymore, right? So and just to keep it short, I think now the mobile market is going to be more and more like PC and console market, and the game itself, the IP you are building, gonna be more important going forward. And the quality of game gonna be more important going forward. So we still actively invest in mobile, but not on those genres that purely depend on the user acquisition optimization.
Well, then you're certainly saying that even though hyper-casual has been the leading growth, that is not going to be part of your future investable mobile market.
That's not our thesis. But hyper-casual, I would say there's a kind of a hybrid. You can't say it's a game, but it's also an ad medium, right? So that's just I don't categorize that as a part of the our regular game. I would say the majority of the mobile game, I would say going forward, gonna look more like what you have on Steam and the console. I think that's what part of the future gonna be. Cross-platform, really about experience and how to engage people on the longer horizon.
Sure, cross-platform is not an issue. Obviously, people want to be able to play games everywhere. Do one of the other panelists have a view on mobile that's different?
I think we may have a slightly different view because even you think under the broader thesis of everyone can game, casual games actually come into a very important part of that broader thesis. Like we want to support the next generation games that my sister can play, my mom can play, and other kids in college and high schools can continue to play. And those may come in very diverse assets and content, but also potentially be different platforms as well. Obviously, I think Ryan and I are in the same page in terms of like we all believe the future will be cross-platform. I'm a big Genshin Impact player myself, but I spend both times in console and mobile. And I think there's a lot of technology breakthrough over the past decade that have enabled that too. Even when you look at the Unreal Engine 5 and like kind of the latest release about some of the lightning details of the engine designs, it is enabling a further step forward into cross-platform content. So definitely we believe the future will stay, but we remain probably slightly more positive than you guys on the breadth of the games in mobile.
Okay, thanks, Sean. The good news for everybody is that there's a huge amount of dry powder that is dedicated to games. And even if they may drop a little bit investing in the next 6 to 12 months, they have to produce an IRR. They have to invest within the first 3, 4, maybe 5 years. And thanks to Sean, to Ryan Lai, and Ryan Yu for giving pointers to where you'll be investing. And we look forward to some of their money going to several of you in the audience. Thank you all for coming. We will be outside after the
You can come back this way. All right, thank you so much, Shan, Ryan, and Eric. And that concludes our GamesBeat Summit Next event. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you to our amazing speakers. And this event would not be possible without our incredible sponsors. So one more time, let's get it for our sponsors here. And also thank you to our partners. And thank you to our advisory board. And thank you to the VentureBeat staff. But let's also give it up for the AV team that kept everything lit, kept everything mic'd, and everything streaming. So thank you all. We look forward to seeing you at the next GamesBeat event in February and the flagship GamesBeat Summit 2023 event in May in Los Angeles. So thank you all. Safe travels. Have a great day.